Good afternoon. My name is Beth Chappell. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club, and what a pleasure it is to welcome you here today. If you'd do us all a favor and take a moment to silence those cell phones, we'd greatly appreciate it.
No.
And I'd like to invite you to join me for the pledge. Yeah, that means you too. I invite you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance and an invocation afterwards. If you'd kindly stand, the flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kindly remain standing. Our invocation today will be delivered by Reverend Chad Oyer, who is the Associate Pastor at the First Methodist Church of Birmingham. Reverend?
Will you join me in prayer? Give her wisdom. May we be receivers of wisdom today. Grand Architect, teach us to build anew. Creator, may we learn to innovate with deep intention and effectively. Great Leader, may we become better leaders today. And Lover of all, ultimately gift our hearts so that we are caring and compassionate leaders and co-workers. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Oyer. And folks, once again, what a pleasure it is to welcome you here today to this meeting of the Detroit Economic Club. One of the terrific traditions of the Economic Club is our student program, and I would like to take a moment to share with you that may be attending your first meeting today. We have a long tradition of student participation at our Detroit Economic Club meetings. And that participation is made possible by the people behind these wonderful logos. So you can check this out at your place. Lots of logos, and we love that. And the reason why we love that very seriously is the people behind those companies are the reason why we are here. So we so appreciate your support. Also, the people behind those companies are the reason that we're able to host high school and or college students at every one of our meetings. And the students not only have the opportunity for a nice lunch and to participate in this nice program, they also have the opportunity to spend about a half hour prior to the program beginning with our guest speakers. And I can tell you that is always a terrific experience. If you're ever questioning whether we're in good hands of the future, come to one of our student meetings. It's really pretty fantastic. So we always like to take an opportunity to welcome those students and to thank the folks and the companies that they work for making that possible. So Patricia McCann and Janice Tessier from Comerica, thank you so much for sponsoring Detroit Cristo Rey High School students. R.L. Polk and Company was supporting Milford High School students today. Thank you very much, Stephen Polk. Brad Ridenauer and the great folks at CompuWare are underwriting the opportunity for our University of Windsor guests today. East Detroit High School, thanks to Blue Cross Blue Shield and Bridget Hurd to make that possible. Joyce Genero and the great folks at the Detroit Free Press, thank you very much for making it possible for Central High School students to join us today. All right, I guess they're back there. Sasha Varma and the great folks at Health Alliance Plan, thank you so much for sponsoring Osborne Evergreen Academy students. I guess they're over there. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our student guests and thanking the great people that made it possible. All right, a few more things. First of all, we welcome anybody who shares our passion for engaging in the great business, government, and social issues of our day to consider membership in our organization. Also part of our program, again, for those of you that may be joining us for the first time, we will have a question and answer session after our moderated discussion here. So you should have blue question cards on your tables. If the thought comes to you at any time during the program, please feel free to write those questions down, and if you could just pass it to this front table, we will be sure that it gets to the right person. Two more quick things. Our guest speaker today is the author of a terrific book called Ninja Innovation. I'm sure you'll hear a bit about that during our program. Our guest speaker has agreed to stay afterwards. We'll have books for sale out in the lobby, and he will be happy to sign them for $25.99 if you are interested. And last thing, I wanted to bring your attention to our Young Leader Program. We have a terrific new program at the Economic Club focused on our under 36-year members. We're doing special programming for them. They sell out immediately. We limit it to 50 young leaders, and we ask our directors to host these groups of people. It's become very, very popular, and we've got another one coming up next week with the chairman and CEO of Lear Corporation, Matt Simoncini. So I mentioned this. It is sold out, so there's no more tickets, but it's a terrific program, and if any of you in this room are under 36 years of age, which I know there are many, and those of you that are supporting and or mentoring people, this is a terrific program to get them involved in. So with that, please join me in welcoming our presiding officer today. Joyce Genero is the president and CEO of the Detroit Media Partnership. Joyce and the folks at the Detroit Media Partnership are great supporters of the Detroit Economic Club. Joyce is a member of our board of directors. She is our host for the day today. She's a good friend, and she and her team do so much in the community on top of all the great work they do. Well, join me in welcoming Joyce Genero.
Thanks, Beth. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. You know, when Gary and I were sitting at lunch, I was thinking that about 20 years ago, he and I may not have had a lot to talk about in terms of our businesses and what we did. But, you know, today we definitely speak the same language. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, you know, how we disseminate news and information now. It's on all different platforms, and it's all very, very digital. So we had a lot to talk about, actually. And it's really a reminder of how innovation affects all of us all the time, including what we do in our business and personal lives. So let's talk about Gary. One of Gary Shapiro's main jobs as president and CEO of the Consumer Electronics Association is overseeing an electronics trade show so huge that he warns visitors that it's far too big for anyone to see it all. In fact, at this year's show, Gary walked almost 56,000 steps, which converts to just over a marathon, or 26 and a half miles. This most recent international CES was held in January at the Las Vegas Convention Center. It offered nearly 2 million square feet of exhibit space, about the size of 37 football fields. It attracted more than 150,000 attendees. 35,000 of them were from abroad. CES has become the showcase of innovation in our country and a launching pad for entrepreneurs. Exhibitors this year unveiled more than 20,000 new electronic products. It's really all about the next great thing. For more than 20 years, Gary Shapiro has headed the CEA, an Arlington, Virginia-based trade association that represents more than 2,000 consumer electronic companies. He's had a front row seat to a consumer electronics revolution. It's been a great way to gain some valuable insights into how innovation works and what the government ought to do to encourage that. And Gary hasn't been shy about sharing those insights. His latest book, Ninja Innovation, The 10 Killer Strategies of the World's Most Successful Businesses, ties the methods of successfully innovative companies to the qualities of ancient ninja warriors and his own achievement of a black belt in karate, which is the first time we talked about that today. Gary is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Comeback: How Innovation Will Restore the American Dream. He writes a weekly column for Forbes on innovation, is a regular contributor to the Huffington Post, Daily Caller, and other publications. He has testified before Congress on technology and business issues more than 20 times. And Washington Life magazine has repeatedly named him as one of the 100 most influential people in Washington. Before joining the association, Gary was an associate at the law firm of Squire Sanders. He received his law degree from Georgetown University and his undergrad degree from Binghamton University. Yep, and Gary actually may be your neighbor. He lives in Metro Detroit and splits his time between here and his job in Virginia. And Gary, I understand that you're a runner, and I would like to extend an invitation for you to run in the Detroit Free Press Marathon this October. I think I can get you a discount on your entry fee. I think I can. Our moderator today is Stephen Clark, who has been a member of the WXYZ TV Action News team since 2001. He anchors Action News at 6, 7, and 11 p.m. He brings more than 30 years of journalistic experience and has pretty much done it all. He's been a newspaper photographer, a radio reporter, a DJ, and a TV reporter, and finally a television anchor. He's been a journalist in San Diego, Colorado Springs, Denver, New York, and Washington, D.C. Stephen received his degree in journalism with a minor in music from the University of Northern Colorado, Greeley. And true to his educational roots, he's still a singer and songwriter. In fact, you can occasionally find him performing around town. So let's give a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome to Gary and Stephen. Stephen, take it away.
The first time I met Gary was actually, I think, around 1997-ish. I was working for CBS in New York, and they had this, I was doing a lot of technology stories, and the big story of the day was this newfangled contraption called HD TV. Right at that point, we all lived in a 4x3 box, and somebody had this wise idea to make it 16 by 9 and give it all sorts of definition, which scared the hell out of anchors everywhere. But nonetheless, it happened. And this guy really was a driving force in the development of what we came today. So before we get going on anything else, I'd just like to ask you about that. Where were we in '97 at that point when HD was about to break onto the scene, and there was so much confusion at the time?
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you to the Detroit Economic Club and all of you for coming. I really appreciate this. HD TV, you know, I am so passionate about that, and I worked on it for some 20 years, that when I die, I want to have a tombstone. It'll be 16 by 9 aspect ratio, because I believe in it. You know, there were so many things that happened along the way. There was a great debate going on in this country as to whether Americans wanted the best quality. And in Europe, they decided, the government there decided the Europeans didn't. So they actually had an inferior standard that was still square-like. And they basically, the satellite companies came out above the broadcasters, and everyone just bought these wider screen sets anyhow, and the broadcasters weren't ready, so they had to do a two-step solution. Japanese, they wanted to get there first, and they didn't wait for digital. They did it with analog, and they had to recall about 100,000 TV sets when digital came along. It was a U.S. invention. So where we were just debating between the industry and the different industries, because it was broadcasters and cable and satellite and equipment makers, and the content producers, as well as dealing with the government. And we did it in a very cooperative basis. It's probably the best example of industry-government cooperation that I'm familiar with. And we worked it out. We said we want the U.S. to have the best possible standard, unique to the U.S., because the U.S., if you compare it to Japan or Europe, we have a huge footprint in the United States. And it's very diverse geographically. There's a lot of cities, but then there's like hundreds of miles of just nobody. And you have to have a very robust broadcast signal that could reach everywhere. And we ended up with the best system, and I'm pretty proud of what we did.
We'll talk about how that lesson also applies to Ninja Innovation, because I suspect there is a lesson to be heard in that. But first of all, we're going to talk about Ninja Innovation. First of all, the name, I'm sure you have a love-hate relationship with that name now, because so many people look at it and say, okay, what's this Ninja thing?
Actually, I still like it. You know, for as long as I can remember, I've been using the word ninja. Like, think like a ninja. Think like I would tell my kids that. This is important that you, which means a ninja solves problems, even if they seem unsurmountable. So what we tell our employees is, if you hit a brick wall, and this is good for especially the students in the organization, if you want to know how to get ahead of the job, here's the secret. Don't go back to your boss who asked you to do something and tell him you can't do it. Go back to your boss and tell him what the solution is to the problem. You get through that wall, you break through it, you leap over it, you go into another dimension, and you go to a parallel universe. You figure out the solution to the problem. Same thing in anything in life. You know, everyone thinks there are two solutions, a yes or a no or a this or that. There's always another way of doing things. So ninjas were these ancient Japanese warriors, and they were always outmanned, outgunned. They had out everything. But they would almost always still win. Why? Because they were ninjas. They thought out of the box. They were clever. They had a plan. They had a strategy. But they also knew, as anyone who's ever studied, as I believe you come from a military family, you know, when you have a plan, the first time you have contact with the enemy, it goes away. And you have to think on your feet and adjust. And that's what frankly, I think ninjas do. That's what I think Americans are good at. is adjusting, being clever, and also coming up with a team. So what a lot of people do is when they create a team, they want everyone just like themselves. That doesn't work. You don't need someone like yourself. We're all human beings. We all have weaknesses. As you get older, you start confessing and understanding your own weaknesses, and you realize you're not perfect, which is something you don't realize when you're younger. And then you start building people around your weaknesses. In fact, part of the not fun part of being a CEO is that you often do employee reviews. They're not my favorite time. And the way I used to do is I would call an employee and say, these are your weaknesses, go work on them. Here's some courses you should take, things you should do. That doesn't work. People aren't going to change their weaknesses. So what I started doing is saying, how can we hire people that work around your weaknesses? Let's just acknowledge them and move forward. And that became a way of my understanding of building a team, a ninja team of people who are really strong together. They're honest with each other. They have ethics. All the categories, all the things a ninja would do.
So give us some examples in the real world, and you represent, 2,000 companies?
Yes.
So give us an example, maybe using one of those 2,000 of like the ideal ninja company that has the ability as a big entity, a company, not just a guy, but a company that has that ability to turn on a dime, to find its way around that brick wall or through it.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the truth is if you're a small company, and I speak to a lot of entrepreneur groups, they have a big advantage over big companies, it takes a long time to switch. But I'll give you a couple examples very quickly. So Ford Motor Company, a few years ago, having some big issues. Their board was a ninja board. They made a decision to hire this guy from outside the auto industry. No one had ever done that before in the auto industry. And they hired Alan Mulally from Boeing, and he totally changed the company. Instead of being a car company, they became a technology company, redefined how Fords are bought and sold. They didn't take any of the bailout money, and they've gotten a benefit. Another great company, Visteon. Visteon's a company which makes various parts of a car. And what they focused on is say, look, the U.S. market's a great market, but so is the world. 95% of the consumers live around the world. So what they do is they create products for different people around the world. Different people react to dashboards differently. The colors, the words that are used. You have to basically be local when you're a multinational company, and I think Visteon's done a good job of that.
You talk in your book about IBM as being an example of one of these massively big companies. You say it's like a cruise ship. When you steer it, you don't turn on a dime. You steer and then you wait a week for the boat to go. How did a company like IBM manage to navigate that kind of world where things changed so fast around them?
It's a great company. It started off as a data processing company with the punch holes, which I didn't even remember, but there were these little cars that ran computers. You're much older than
I know.
No, I'm just kidding. Probably not.
Probably true.
So then they switched to a computer company, a mainframe company. Then they switched to a personal computer company in the early 1980s. And then I think it was the Super Bowl, if I recall, in the late 80s or early 90s, maybe it was in the 90s. They were the first one to do a .com ad. And they said, we're going to define ourselves as .com, and they launched into that world. Now what are they doing? They're making a ton of money because they basically go around the world, and they'll invest a lot in solving a problem for one area of the world. And then they'll apply that solution worldwide to everyone else who wants to pay for it. And they've just done brilliantly.
You also talk in your book about failure and how people believe failure to be something that is a game stopper. But you tend to argue that failure is actually a plus. It's something that can actually be of value. Around my place, I'm not sure that's true, but...
Well, it's even getting fired is a good thing sometimes because you learn from it. But if you walk away from one thing today, it's this concept, is that if you think back in your personal life or your professional life or both about the things where you really had a learning experience, it was probably around failure, rejection, not succeeding. Because when you succeed, you start thinking you're really smart and you start believing your own press releases and all that. And that's really not healthy. But when you fail and you come back, that's a good thing. And what's great, I don't want to be too nationalistic because I learned just before lunch there's some Canadians who I love, and I'll consider you part of the audience. But the U.S. is one of the few cultures in the world where failure is okay, where failure is something in the business world is considered a learning experience. In interviews you're often asked, tell me when you failed and what you've learned from it. And that's a very important question I always ask, and it's an important question to answer and be honest about failure, because that is a great thing. And it's also Silicon Valley, elsewhere. You hear about people's failures in a positive way. Other cultures, you fail, you're disgraced for the rest of your life. You ruin your family's reputation. And that's why someone told me recently, I don't know if this is true, that in the U.S., more companies have been created each year since World War II than in all of Europe since World War II. And why is that? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we're more entrepreneurial, more innovative than Europe. But one of them is how we treat failure here.
Can you give us an example of a company that has failed spectacularly and still succeeds?
I was going to say Microsoft, because they are succeeding despite the fact they've failed a number of times. And I talk in the book about my embarrassing experience when I told Bill Gates he had the most wonderful product in the world, and it was a dancing paperclip. Does anyone remember the dancing paperclip? This is a generational question. And that was my failure.
That was the one that the icon on the screen that when you wanted to open a document, the little thing would come out, and I felt like just smacking it?
Yes. It was the only product that was ever hated, and that's when it failed spectacularly. And Microsoft's obviously, they've done well with Kinect and with Windows and their video games. Other examples, every company that's ever succeeded has failed. Apple, obviously, has had a whole bunch of failures. We just remember their successes. But that's, it's okay to fail. The thing about failing, and for all the parents in the audience, you got to let your kids fail. The trend we're facing is not a good trend. Is that no scores are kept, kids can't fail, there's no competition. You have to let your kids fail, and that's an important thing to do so they learn from it. If you coddle them for all their lives, then they won't be able to make decisions, they won't grow, they won't take risks. But failure is about taking risks. In terms of companies, every company has failed. Every car company has failed. We failed. I failed.
We failed.
I don't know.
But we get back up and we try it again.
We get back up. That's what we do.
So we've got a lot of business owners, CEOs, that type of people in this room right now who'd probably all say, okay, give me some tips that I can take back with me to become the ninja of my industry.
Well, to me, ninjas have to be flexible, and you have to really think outside the box. And how do you do that? Well, there's all sorts of techniques, and we use them in our office, brainstorming techniques. We recognize it's just not the senior executives that have great ideas. The ones that really have good ideas are the ones actually the closest to the customers, talking all the time, because people who work at an organization are almost always good people, and they want to do well at their job. And if you ask them questions, you'll get answers. If you ask, is there a better way of doing something, or do you have any ideas about how we can get additional revenue, they'll often come up with them. And that's an important thing to realize, is that you have to listen a lot. People have this idea of salesmen, for example, that sales is out there and hard pitching and selling and going to the close. And I'll tell you, we have a sales team, highly incentivized, as is everyone on our staff. We have 150 employees. Every employee is on incentive compensation based on SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic with a timetable. That's SMART, the acronym. But what our sales team does is they don't go out and sell. They go out and listen. They ask questions. They see what problems that people have, and they come up with a way of solving those problems that are customized to that person. And that's our it's not a great secret. A lot of companies do this in terms of selling. But that's how you get additional revenue, is you just become a really good listener and you solve someone else's problem.
Now, in your book, you talk about the 10 killer strategies, so I assume you list those 10 strategies, and they would include what you've been talking about here. Mm-hmm. All right. Do you want to give us the other ones, or you want to wait?
Well, I talked about failure. I talked about building a team. Mm-hmm. Certainly thinking outside the box. And there's also, obviously, you have to prepare and you have to have a strategy and a plan. And that's very, very important. You really do have to think things through and think of different options. Yesterday I was at the Disney on Ice. Has anyone seen that here? Okay. Oh, yeah, the daughter with a princess outfit. Yeah, that was, I saw these princess outfits. It was a lot of fun, but I was attending that event, and I kept thinking the logistics of it. Because we produce the largest event in the country. Logistics are very important. So we're out there planning our 2014, 2015, 2016 events, and whether it's the carpet or the buses or things like that. And we have an operational plan, which is tough. And then we have to do a lot of different things to prepare. But things always happen that are different. A bomb-sniffing dog has a hit. You got to deal with it. Things happen, especially with when you're dealing with the public and events. So that's what I focus on is planning and preparing and options. And in terms of being a leader of an organization, I think all those of you that are leadership, you would agree, your job as a leader is not only to hire really well people who will basically run your organization for you in the best way, but you have to be out there thinking of trends, coming to events like this one, going out there and thinking on the far future. The higher you are up in an organization, the more you're thinking about things way, way into the future, the overall strategy of the organization. And in terms of the overall strategy, it's very different than thinking of the tactics that get you through the day or the week or making your monthly numbers.
Let's talk about the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. How many people have been to the Consumer Electronics Show? Show of hands here.
Not enough.
Yeah. He'll fly you out there next year, free of charge. So give us an idea. I was curious when you're talking about planning the show for 14 and 15 and 16 down the road. Technology changes every 3 weeks. How can you plan a show when you don't even know that the star of that show is not even on the drawing board yet?
It's difficult because you have to take some risks. You have to make financial commitments, and hopefully you're right. And we have had to pay for commitments we haven't met. That's one of the failures that you learn from, frankly. But in terms of overall space and things like that, you figure it out. I mean, you just have to do that. We've done a whole bunch of things for this coming up show. We've changed 3 of our major contractors out. Not that any of them were doing a bad job, and we like to be loyal, but we just want to do things different and better. So we're training new contractors to how we do business. It's a culture that we have as well. But yeah, we've already pretty much lined up our keynote speakers for the 2014 event, and we're looking at invitations for the 2015 event as well.
Now, out of these shows, every year come the devices. I believe this iPad was introduced at a CES show, or kind of made its public debut after Apple had done one of its little dog and pony shows. But you see at the CES these things before America does. What have you seen over the last 5 or 6 years that really blew your socks off, and what do you see is going to be the trend over the next couple of years from what you saw this last year?
Well, I told the students earlier when they asked, the things that are really exciting for me are 5 categories. There's ultra-high definition TV, which is TV set 4 times the picture quality of HD.
I really hate that.
Also called 4K, yeah. It's pretty expensive, which is a big barrier that is bothering me because I'm building a home now, actually, in Birmingham. I really would just like to have one of them in my house, given my job. I'm practicing to justify this to my wife, by the way. Another one is clearly we're heading towards a driverless car, and the ramifications of driverless car are absolutely huge. Right now you hear the backup sounds, which are very helpful, and so you don't hit kids and things behind you. We're going to collision avoidance systems, and a driverless car is technically possible. The costs have to be brought down. But the issues there are huge. I mean, think of how it'll help disabled people, drunk people. Think what it will do to jobs. I mean, there's an issue that I keep wondering about is how that'll impact jobs. There's so many people who are drivers, whether driving trucks or cars or taxis or you name it. So if you don't need a driver, how that'll impact society, because that's a big deal. But think of all the Geicos and the car insurance companies. If there's no car accidents, what happens to emergency rooms? What happens to healthcare? What happens to all these systems, the businesses have been built up around it? I mean, it's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole bottom line of technology that you should keep in mind always is that everything that comes along new is affecting something that is old. You're affecting the status quo. You're affecting something old. And those old businesses, they yell really loudly. When the car came along, the horse and buggy guys really were upset. And that was we laugh now, but it's true. I mean, there was a lot of businesses that relied around that, and they don't exist anymore. When the internet came along, I mean, look what happened to travel agents. They were decimated. Now, thankfully, they didn't stop the internet, but there's so many other businesses now. Brick and mortar stores, they've been challenged by Amazon and eBay and others, especially because Amazon and eBay, they don't charge sales tax. So, I mean, there's some discrepancies there and things that are still being worked out. But you're always challenging the status quo. You're always going to get pushed back. And what's great about what we do here in this country is we favor the new over the old. We have a First Amendment which protects us so anyone could rebel without getting stomped on by government. And we have a free market system which encourages people to try new things.
You talk about the pushback of companies, and I hadn't planned on bringing this up, but it's been an issue that you've been dealing with, and that's the dish hopper, I think is what it's called. It's a satellite dish that records, it's a DVR, but it's designed to skip the commercials. And you talk about pushback, it was CBS that pushed back and said, you can't do this, you can't skip commercials because that's how we make our money.
So early on in my career when I was a lawyer, even a law student, I was working on this case which went to the Supreme Court, and it actually was based on a filing by a court of appeals that said a VCR, and for those of you young listeners, VCR is a video cassette recorder. It allowed you to record for the first time ever. You didn't have to watch something when television was showing it or go to a movie theater. You could record it and watch when you wanted to. So a court held that it was an illegal product. in 1981, actually. And the Supreme Court heard twice, 1984-85, called the Sony Betamax case. And they basically, the court held by one vote, 5-4, that it is legal. And on the basis of that, frankly, there exists the internet, there exists personal video recorders, which is one of the greatest products of all time in my view, because you could, basically record stuff and it really easily, and it works well. But that was close to being all illegal. Well, along came this company called Dish, someone known as EchoStar, and they created this product called the Hopper. And the Hopper allows you to record, basically, and then it'll erase the commercials after 24 hours. And so ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox sued. And they said that product must be illegal. And that was about a year ago. Well, this is a little complicated, but along the way, CBS had actually bought this company that we had a partnership with called CNET. Have any of you been to the CNET website? A number of you. It's a very good website. They have great, and they're really good. They spent over $1 billion to buy this company. And it's a great product. It's a website that reviews products. So our contract in Las Vegas was they'll choose the best products at CES. Well, their editors got together in January at the CES, and they said they all agreed, 40 editors agreed, that the best product at the CES was this product from Dish, Hopper, actually a next generation product.
Awkward.
It was awkward, and honestly, I didn't even know that CBS had bought CNET. I didn't pay attention to that because they were a great partner of ours. We used it for years. And all of a sudden, we get this awkward phone call from CNET saying, "Well, we can't consider this product because CBS has told us we can't." And I said, "What?" And I get a call from the head of Dish. She says, "I'm outraged about this. You must do something." And we couldn't believe it either. But CBS told them they couldn't consider the product. Not only that, they told them to lie about it. And actually, it already won, which is news to us. That came out the next week. If you really want to read something interesting, there's a blog on this by the head of CNET where she confesses that they basically deceived their public. But she said, look, we work for a corporation. When you work for a corporation, you have to follow orders. So to make a long story endless, no, so we just, being trained as a lawyer, I wanted to sue them. So what's the point of that? And instead we said, you know what? We own the show. We'll just declare it the best product at the show. And we did. So everyone was happy. Almost everyone.
Since we're talking about ninja innovation, what occurs to me is you take a look at the people at CNET that work for CBS. Now, they're trying to be innovative. They're trying to push the envelope, and they're getting smushed down from the top. Now, a lot of people in this room are business owners, but then a lot of people work for other people. So for those of us worker bees, how do we become ninja innovators when the samurai at the top of the corporate ladder is pushing back?
That's a great question. So the samurai is usually pushing back because of revenue or expenses. So you have to figure out a way to get around that and make it a positive revenue or expense minimum. And you have to sell. You have to present something that the way you sell, as I said earlier, is to ask questions, you solve a problem. You also paint a picture of what reality could look like if your idea comes to fruition. And if you can't do it, the option of any employee is to quit and get a new job. I mean, that's what the CNET people, one guy did quit. He said this violates all journalistic integrity and ethics as I was raised, and he quit, and others were unhappy, and it's still playing out. But your ultimate tool, Lincoln freed the slaves. No one's a slave anymore. You could quit your job. So the bottom line of it is that you could always walk, which is a difficult thing to do, especially if you have financial obligations in a place, but it's the ultimate tool. Or you could freelance.
There you go.
So, I mean, there's always another solution is the bottom line.
I always tell my coworkers, they start complaining, I said, well, I tell you what, why don't you scrape together a couple $1 million and buy your own TV station?
There you go.
Not always easy.
Or start your own.
Let's talk about the car companies. You mentioned Ford briefly about its conversion, and I know I interviewed Alan Mulally a few years ago, and I asked him the question. I said, are you a car company or a technology company? And he laughed.
A technology company.
Well, he laughed, and he says, we're both.
Okay.
Which you'd like to see as a technology company alone. But all the automakers have and suppliers have had to get into this world of consumer electronics. It used to be all you needed in your car was a windshield wiper and a radio, and you're good. Maybe a cigarette lighter. Nowadays, it's all about the technology.
Well, there's a lot of research which shows when people buy a car, they look at the technology in the car almost more than anything else. Look, it used to be 0 to 60 in how many seconds and what the horsepower was. That era has passed. The cars are pretty good, and some cars have bigger engines and can accelerate faster, of course, and some are safer, of course. But people are buying on the basis of technology, what it can do, and sometimes even the brands that are in there. which is fine. And I mean, because there's so much in the shift. So we had 8 of the 10 largest car companies exhibiting at CES. We had over 100,000 square feet of space just dedicated to car companies. And works nicely with the Detroit Auto Show because a lot of the Europeans and Asians, they come, they do both shows. They're right next to each other in time. You go to Detroit, you go to Las Vegas. And I love Detroit. As I say, I'm investing a lot of money here building a house. But Las Vegas is pretty exciting. People like to go there. So what the show works for them because they want to be close to technology. A lot of the value add of the car is now technology. And what we're doing is, over two-thirds of people 18 to 35 now, so they want, when they buy a car, they want it to be connected. So where we're shifting in the car is we're shifting to a car that is just like your home in a sense. It's, it'll be internet enabled. You'll have all the things you want there, all the services, whether it's content, direction, or even more important, actually, it can tell you about where you're going when you're going by it. I love a GPS, but I want a GPS which starts learning. We're going in that direction, so they learn the ways you go, the things that happen, and that's things are moving in so many different areas of technology in the car.
We've talked about ninja innovation in companies. How about in municipalities? And I speak specifically of Detroit. I mean, it's obviously a city that's badly in need of innovation of any kind. How can the philosophy of ninja innovation apply to a city like Detroit?
That's very interesting. About 3 weeks ago, I was invited to speak before the Customs and Border Patrol. And they had their top 30 executives from around the country in one room, and I was the only civilian. And my definition of innovation until that point had been innovation is anything different which someone is willing to pay for. Well, that doesn't work in government at all. So we substitute to pay for that has value. So you just do your job better. And boy, you want to talk about technology taking over an area of government. Customs and Border Patrol is one where they're using a lot of technology very quickly in a very good way. Detroit, I certainly is when I spoke to the Detroit Economic Club over 5 years ago, and I reread the speech a couple of times. It was a very formal speech. It was one of my first big speeches. I was really excited, almost as excited as I am right this second. But what I talked about was the fact that Detroit is at a crossroads. And Detroit was, if you recall, was way ahead of the rest of the country in terms of recession. And I said the challenge that Detroit's doing is it's painting a picture of itself as an area of the country that needs help and is not helping itself and needs a government handout. And I reread that, and I still agree with what I said because I think Detroit has hurt itself by reaching out and saying, oh, woe is me, give me a handout. And even President Obama, he means well, but he's made Detroit a special project, and it hasn't really helped. When instead, though, Detroit has basically stepped up on its own and done so many great things with the car companies, the car suppliers, even startups. There's a lot of startups in Detroit. There's a great company called Livio. Is anyone from Livio here? There you go. The president of Livio is here. And, internet radio. And Detroit has the best workforce in the world, I think. It's highly trained, wants to work hard, and is underutilized. And it's not that expensive to be here. Detroit has a phenomenal story. And I was glad to see the Super Bowl by Clint Eastwood a year and a half or so ago. That really made a difference. But I think right now what's going on is like equally bad. And all this talk about what's going to happen and barricading the highways and all that. And the city of Detroit itself with a history of mayors that don't work. And a mayor now, I think, I personally feel, is very good. He just has to get some support and show it out there. And yes, the state wants to help out and take over and do things. You got to do something. I lived through the same thing in D.C., where the federal government's always taking over D.C. and doing things. And there's always this tension there, and it's in the Constitution. But there's a big problem here, and it has to be solved. And a lot of the people in the room are the people who can make it solved, the businesses with a stake in Detroit. And I'll tell you, I have a stake in Detroit now because this is way too much about me, but I commute here every week from Washington, and I met my wife. She was single. She had a home. I'm still in that home. It's really tiny with 2 kids and people coming and going, and we're building a house here. So I've made my big investment. I want to see Detroit succeed, but I really think we've got to pick ourselves up and do it. And frankly, the city council's in the way. They have to be voted out. The city council's in the way with all their entitlements. And, you read the Wall Street Journal story about like 500 unions in the city of Detroit, including one union with only one person in it. I mean, how does this happen? So we got to change the optics, as we say in Washington, of Detroit. And the business leaders of Detroit have to come together and position Detroit in a way with a script that we all agree upon. And that's a script that talks about how great Detroit is as a place to do business, given the phenomenal workforce and the reasonable cost and the beauty. I mean, it's great. And our friends to the north are just right across the river.
Compare that to the success that Michigan's had over the state of Michigan over the last 3. I mean, Michigan was in the same kind of dire straits as Detroit was 3 years ago, and was that ninja innovation? I mean, you saw a governor came in and certainly changed the script.
Oh, sure. Rick Snyder comes from the consumer electronics industry. He was a gateway. I mean, no, it's if you can survive there, you can survive anywhere. No, I think he's been a great leader. He's made a difference, and that's good for him.
Okay, I think we're going to take some questions from the audience now, because you always have better questions than I do anyway.
All right.
Anything you wanted to add before we get to that? There.
No, I want to hear questions from the audience.
All right, there we go. I always do that in an interview. I give the subject the last chance. Anything you'd like to add? And 9 times out of 10, it's the thing I use on the air. So I could just get the rest of the interview. Okay.
All right. So what is the greatest challenge to innovation right now?
I don't want to sound too partisan. The greatest challenge to innovation today is our government. We have a deficit we're not dealing with. We've had 5,000 rules proposed in the last 120 days. Starting a business, you don't know what laws you're breaking. I mean, you don't know. I mean, the laws have gotten so ambiguous and disproportionate to the crime. I mean, I attended a memorial service last month, which really struck me, for a guy named Aaron Swartz, who was helped found Reddit. Has anyone used Reddit? No? Okay. Well,
the young people and me.
Aaron Swartz was 26 years old. He committed suicide because he was subject to a 32-year sentence in jail because he figured out how to break into and download some computer files at a university. He didn't do anything with them. He just downloaded them on his computer, and all of a sudden he's facing most of his life in jail. And sadly, he committed suicide. He was one of the most brilliant young people. And members of Congress of Republicans and Democrats spoke, and his father spoke. And his father pointed out that some of the great innovators of our time, and even before them, whether it's Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, and you go back, Ben Franklin, they pushed the envelope. And that's what you have to do. You have to push the envelope to be an innovator. You have to do something different because someone else hasn't done it. And that's our culture. Our culture is pushing the envelope. So to the extent government is trying to restrict that, that's a big deal. And we're seeing it in all sorts of ways. We're involved in all sorts of lawsuits by old companies like the television networks, with all respect, I mean ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, suing upstarts who are just trying to provide a service, a legal service. And when we're debating whether guns should be legal or not, making technologies illegal because they copy something, it's crazy. So I think the government is, and it's not just about technology. Uber is a car service which is taken off across cities in the country. Basically takes idle limousine drivers and redirects them to pick up someone with a really sophisticated algorithm, and it works great. People are passionate about Uber. But what they're finding is in D.C. and New York and other taxi commissions, Philadelphia, they're shutting them down because it violates the taxi cabs, their monopoly. So what if it's green, it deploys people want it, and it's like so much more expensive than a cab, it's not really even a substitute. There's all sorts of new businesses that are starting because of the internet, and government is often getting in the way, and it's a bad thing. And one of the most liberal senators in the last half of the last century was Senator George McGovern. He ran for president, actually, against Nixon, right? Okay. He was the most liberal Democrat in the world. He left the Senate after a number of years and became a business owner. And what he said was, I had no idea, being a liberal Democrat, that all these well-intentioned things stopped me from doing my job. And it's true.
So a little bit more personal now. What do you say to people who say they are not creative and therefore not good at innovation?
That's really, I've never heard anyone tell me that. Everyone, I think, I am amazed, as for example, that some people can fix a car. I can't fix a car. I can't even find my way home here today. I'll have to look at a map. I believe that everyone has the same mind capacity. It's just in different areas of their brain. It's like an attic, and there's only so much room to store stuff. And so everybody's good at something. So you have to figure out what it is you're good at. And one of the things I talk a lot about in the book is actually when you go to an event like this, when you're sitting next to someone, the best thing you can do is to ask questions. And you have to learn how to ask. Well, you're great at asking questions because that's what you do for a living. But anyone should be able to be good at asking questions. I talked about our sales force. They ask questions. If you ask other people questions, you will come up with innovative ideas. It may be their idea, and it's okay. Ideas are not patented, copyrighted, or trademarked. And as long as you're not doing something unethical, you'll hear great ideas. There's zillions of great ideas out there waiting for people to act on. So if you don't think your ideas are great. We run the best trade show in the country because we send people out to every other trade show. And we look at what others are doing. We're not stealing. We're copying in a positive way because imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Everyone in business does that. Why do you think every price ends in 9? You think it's just really, that's the margin, and that's the way it's added up? I mean, it's because people realize somebody was doing it, somebody else copied them, and they realize it. People think it's cheaper if it ends in 9. It isn't.
We've got a student question here. In your biography, it talks about business, discipline, strategy, and will. Do you use these basic guidelines to maintain your success?
I always try every day to come up with something new and do something different. And I do set goals and quotas for myself, which some people would consider outrageous. I won't let myself go to the bathroom unless I get my emails under 100, which is a real motivator to click through and delete a lot of stuff. But I won't allow myself to eat unless I've written an op-ed for the day. So yeah, discipline, absolutely. And you have to set priorities. Like, with all respect, I'd love to run a 10K, but there's no way I'm doing a marathon. You have to know what you say no to. I don't have enough.
We have a
time
10K race too, so don't.
I'll do the 10K.
So this is about your show, the Consumer Electronics Show. It pulls in huge numbers of attendees. How do you strike a balance between bigger, better, and quality?
That is a terrific question. So that is, we actually try to limit to about 150 to 1,000, 160,000 people because we know Las Vegas can only, the infrastructure can only handle so many people. So we actually, we set the criteria, especially for people from Nevada and Southern California, really high. They really have, you have to be affiliated with a business. It's not open to consumers. You must have a legitimate business interest or be a journalist or an investor or something. But if you've flown in from Japan or India, the odds are pretty high that you have a business interest in doing that. So we do try to match it off. I used to think the maximum size of the show could be about 1 million square feet. Now we might hit 2 million square feet in 2 years. That's pretty big. We use several different facilities to do that throughout Las Vegas. Las Vegas has grown with us. Las Vegas, here's a fact you can walk away from, has more hotel rooms than any other city in the world. There's about 160,000 hotel rooms in Las Vegas, and no one else comes close. They have 3 of the 10 largest convention centers in the country, and they have more shows and restaurants. And so they could, Las Vegas is designed for our show. We could, people like say, could you have our show in Orlando or Chicago, Detroit? We can't. The cities are too small or they don't have the work. I mean, there's always some reason. Hotel rooms is the biggest limiting factor, though, usually.
Does our current university system serve the reality of today's job environment? Are we teaching innovation and entrepreneurial skills properly?
No, our university system does not meet the job skills required. We have 3 million jobs open in the United States today, a lot of them for highly skilled people. And we are training the people, some of these people. Unfortunately, most of them are international students, and we're kicking them out after they get their PhDs and their master's degrees. It's total insanity. And not only that, the taxpayers are paying for most of that, because $7 billion a year goes from the National Science Foundation to universities for university research. And the way it works in university research, and I don't want to upset any professor here, but the professor actually gets graduate students to do the work and pays them, and then once they get this great knowledge at the very top, we kick them out. So in the areas we need students, we're not getting them. Other areas like law, where we have a surplus of students and then they end up lawyers without jobs, lawyers filing lawsuits. We have like 1 million lawyers in this country. We're the most over-lawyered country in the world, and they just take money out of the system. They don't build anything at all. And I'll say that, I know I'll get kicked out of the bar someday for selling this, but the truth is lawyers just, they argue over how the pie will be divided, and they take their piece of the pie and eat it, and they don't expand the pie. So what you want is people who expand the pie. And frankly, those are people who build things, they're engineers, they're scientists, they're apps developers, they're software, they're mathematicians. They're people who make a difference and do something as opposed to take something. And we become too much take-something society. The universities also have some other problems. I mean, we have the best universities in the world, and we do attract the best students still. But we have a system which is clogged up by two things. And I heard this from a university president, and I served on the university board, Virginia's largest university, for many years. And that is we have a tenure system, so it's the only job in America you can't be fired from, unless you are caught with a young sheep or something. The other, I just realized there's a younger audience here. I apologize. So sorry, where's the TiVo? You can rewind and delete. The other thing is we have an age discrimination law that says you cannot discriminate against anyone if they're over 40. Well, by the time they're over 70 or over 75 or over 80 and they're still teaching and getting paid the maximum, they haven't been trained in their area for 60 years. They clog the system, so there's no jobs at universities for younger graduates, and that's a real problem. So in terms of what we're teaching, how we're teaching, and the other area of our university, community colleges are just the totally overlooked asset of our country. That they're the ones that are training people to do really good things and make a difference, and they're smart, and we need those people desperately. Germany takes a totally different approach. Germany does highly skilled manufacturing and automobiles and medical and others, and their vocational system is your status is equal if you go to university or a community college. For some reason here we have this elitist view of the world where you have to go to a major university as opposed to something else where you're actually doing something constructive.
Back to the government.
Okay.
It appears that there are no ninjas in Congress or in the White House. Business and government are quite different, but do you have innovative thoughts about how to solve our federal financial crisis?
Yes, I do. And I would say there are ninjas in government. I've gotten to know many members of Congress of both parties, and they do work really, really hard. And I know it's not popular to say that, but not only are they in Washington meeting with people, doing hearings, and they have to raise money, but they're back in their districts and their states, and it's a very, very difficult life. And they're some very, very smart people. I think the challenge is that we've created a primary system where you have extremes on both sides, and you must be extreme to get elected. So I'm part of a group called No Labels. And No Labels means you put your country before you put your party. And we've gotten about 50 members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, to sign up and say they're going to work across the aisle and try to solve problems, and that's a good thing. If you want to sign up, it's free. It's nolabels, one word, .org. And the other thing we're doing is we believe so passionately in innovation itself that we've created something called the Innovation Movement. And you could sign up for that. It's innovation, declareinnovation.org. And that is dedicated to what we believe is important in public policy. You know, we spend a lot of time killing SOPA PIPA, which for the young people in the audience know what it is. Others may not. We won on that so that these copyright restrictions on websites are gone. And we're focusing on other things like getting the best and brightest people here, making sure we have free trade, making sure we take care of the next generation by reducing the deficit. We're the only association in Washington that actually supported the bipartisan Simpson-Bowles, because here's the math. And I'm disappointed in our youth that they haven't rebelled in the streets on this one. We are spending, obviously, much more than we're taking in, and we're borrowing from the future. So when we're in such a terrible problem, you could raise taxes, which we're doing. You can cut spending, which we're doing. And the third thing, which we have to do, is grow. Because if you're growing the economy, then more people are paying taxes, fewer people are unemployed, you're paying for a lot less, and it solves most of the problems in the first two. So we have to grow the economy. Growth only comes from innovation. And innovation is who we are and what we do as Americans. And it's very important we realize that. And we're the most innovative country by so many definitions. Everyone wants to be like us. China has a 10-year plan. In that plan, they say we want 1.6 patents per 10,000 people. That's how specific they are. And that's why they have 160,000 Chinese students in our country today, because they want to be innovative like us. We have every internet company, biotech company. We have Apple, the chip companies, Hollywood, the music industry. Everything that's creative and innovative, we totally take over the world. And I've spoken to governments around the world on almost every continent, and they all want to be like us. And some of them try to copy us. Some try to restrict us, sadly, and there's a lot of bad things going on around the rest of the world just to try to hurt our most competitive companies, which is a bad thing. But we have to remember that innovation is a bipartisan national strategy, and there are ninja innovators in Congress. I just wish that the partisans would step out of the way and let them solve some problems and deal with this deficit, which is the biggest problem of our time.
Good.
Thank you.
They're ninjas. They can sneak around the obstacles.
One last question, and this is a student question. How do you feel about another business buying a dying business, like Hostess and their Twinkies?
Save the Twinkie.
You know, the American system is set up so that companies can fail, and most startups do fail. And there's nothing wrong with that, as I indicated earlier. But there are ways that you could have assets as a startup or as a company like Hostess and Twinkies, and you could have good things that people want. The Twinkie brand name is a very valuable brand name. And if someone wants to come along and buy it, that's a great thing. It actually helps the creditors, the people who loan the company the money. And if there's a way of doing it, that's fine. That's the free market. If you see something that's dying and you can make some money on it and save it and get some money back to the people who own the company or have lent money to the company, that's fine. That's the American way. We don't let things go for waste here. And we have to make that very clear, that we have to do whatever it takes to have a rebirth out of something that's dying. And that's a lot of businesses, if you look carefully, even if you look at my favorite device that I use, and I actually wrote the book by dictating it, is the Siri on Apple. I just sent myself emails, and that became my book. That Siri, if you really trace the history of voice recognition systems and transcription systems, goes back a long ways. And there's some ugly parts of it, honestly, which were unfair to the people who actually even invented it because they got hurt in a business transaction allegedly by Goldman Sachs. Bottom line of it is, save an asset, it's a good thing.
Awesome. Stay up here. Gary, you never disappoint. Welcome. Thank you for coming back to the Detroit Economic Club, and I know we'll look forward to the next time. And good luck with that house, and thank you for your investment in Michigan. We appreciate that. Stephen Clark, you are always awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I did fail to mention when I introduced Joyce that the Detroit Media Partnership, I'm sure we all know, is sort of the operations behind the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News. But talk about a ninja innovator. So Joyce was a great choice, at least in my humble opinion, for this session, because they have done so much at the Detroit Media Partnership to be so much more than just print. So congratulations to you, Joyce, and your team for being ninja innovators. And thank you, Gary, for helping us learn what that is. And ladies and gentlemen, it is always, always a privilege for us to have you invest your time with us. We thank you, thank you, thank you so much. With that, this meeting is adjourned, and have a terrific day. Thank you.
I got to get you signed the book here now.
You're still alive.
What's that? Oh, okay.